Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Matt Levine. I am the VP Westcoast at Kingpin Communications. Today, we will be cutting through the hype of ABM and providing you with some practical advice that you can take away and start to implement. I'll be joined shortly by our panel, Carrie Cunningham, Product Manager at 6 Sense, Rob Reynolds, Head of Channel and Tech Marketing at Verizon, and Rob Norham, Growth Expert at B2B Marketing and Propolis. Before we start, let's look at why we're having this conversation today. Although it's been around for over 2 decades, the improvements in data and technology, as well as shifting demands of the B2B buyer, have elevated ABM to being a much talked about marketing and business strategy that promises a significant uplift in business results. However, whilst many organizations have implemented ABM effectively and shown some impressive business outcomes, others have struggled with the reality of orchestrating the levels of data, platforms, skill, and stakeholder buy-in required to implement and execute effective ABM, leading to the trough of disillusionment as shown in Gartner's hype cycle. Kingpin has developed a new ABM playbook that helps break down the key elements and stages of building a program and then putting it into market. It starts with program orchestration and takes you from account selection to optimizing the journey and the continual refinement of account selection, and then into ABM execution, which follows the same pattern externally from targeting to growing accounts. If you're interested in finding out more about our playbook, reach out to me after the webinar or through the Kingpin website. Also, if you're at the B2B Marketing ABM conference in London on the 3rd of November, come speak to us there. Before we begin the panel, just a couple of housekeeping items. There will be 2 poll questions during the discussion. Please take a moment to answer both questions. If you have questions, please use the chat feature and I'll try to get to as many of them as I can during our Q&A at the end. So without further delay, let's get into the panel. Today, we'll be cutting through the hype to discuss practical advice for ABM. Panelists, if you could turn on your cameras. Welcome, everyone. So I'm just going to go around and have everyone quickly introduce themselves more formally. If Rob, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So firstly, thanks very much for the invite to the panel today. I'm Rob Reynolds, and I'm responsible for partner marketing at Verizon. My responsibility stretches across to the US. I have also responsibility for Europe and Asia. The parts of the ecosystem that I've been focusing on are the system integrator, agent, and resale business here. So yeah, it's my great pleasure to join this team today, and looking forward to the discussion.
Fantastic. Thanks, Rob. Let's move on to Robert.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. My name's Robert Norham. I'm a B2B marketeer of 30 years experience. I've specialized in ABM for the last 10 years. And I've been working with B2B marketing for the last 5 years, running their ABM Essentials training course on a monthly basis. And recently taking the role of growth expert on Propolis, which is their new business-to-business community. Alongside that, I work as an independent ABM consultant, advising clients and agencies on a global basis.
Fantastic. Thanks, Robert. And finally, Carrie.
Matt, hi, everybody. Carrie Cunningham. I'm in product marketing for Sense. And but the last 8 years at Serious Decisions and then Forrester, I was co-author of the Demand Unit Waterfall, the B2B Revenue Waterfall, Buyer Signals Framework, and a whole bunch of other stuff that we did there over the last number of years. So really happy to be with you here today.
Fantastic. So we're just going to have a quick poll here to kick things off. Get that poll going. I'll give that just a minute to run here. Looks like we're a fair bit are currently, although a lot are also looking to launch but haven't as of yet. So about 56% said they're currently running ABM, 12% said no, and another 32% not yet, but planning to launch it soon. All right, great. Well, thanks everyone for participating in that first poll. The second one will be midway through through our conversation. So first question, and this is to all of the panelists. What do you think, why do you think it's tough to meet expectations of ABM? And what are the biggest challenges or mistakes that you see most marketers make? I'll start with you, Rob.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I think through the duration of an ABM, there are a number of challenges that you're going to face, right? So, but certainly the standout ones to me that you need to think about how you mitigate these is, so firstly, you know, ABM isn't something that you kind of dabble with, right? It's not something in addition to your marketing plan. You have to really invest a lot of time and resources to give your version of ABM its best chance of success, right? So, and you'll also find that you'll probably need to adapt your ABM strategies to the people, the culture, the processes, the platforms, and the clients of your business. And that will be something that will continue to evolve throughout the course of your ABM for your business. So I think the second bit is that, you know, ABM strategically puts you a lot closer to the sales team, certainly in my experience, right? But you need to be mindful that, you know, it will require more investment from the sales team in terms of their time. And you know, most sales teams are going to see value in ABM. There's no doubt about that in my experience. But you need to think carefully about how much capacity your sales team actually have, right? Because they get a customer escalation, they get a large RFP. Yeah, you probably lost them, you know, for a few weeks or months, right? Also, bear in mind that, you know, regardless of whether or not you're looking at a one-to-one or a one-to-few or a one-to-many, there are always things that can happen between your business and that target customer in terms of the relationship, which can either be good or bad, but will ultimately affect your ABM strategy. So, you know, there are things that will be out of your control that you're going to need to adapt to as well. So those are some of my key learnings that, you know, I've certainly, you know, kind of taken from my recent experience anyway.
Great, thank you. Carrie, what's your perspective?
My perspective is that today's ABM is largely built on the infrastructure that grew up in the early 2000s for leads. And so there's an old story, old parable about something like that, the new wine in old wineskins. It's very difficult to run a really account-centric go-to-market strategy on the infrastructure that is in place in most organizations today. It is very close to impossible. And so organizations are trying to retrofit that to make it work in the new environment. It just doesn't work very well. That requires transformative change, both in the processes and technologies. We'll talk more about that later on, but to me, that's the biggest challenge. Gotcha.
And Robert?
Yeah, well, I think both Rob and Carrie have made good points. From my point of view, I think that the reason people struggle so often is ABM is almost like a kind of, you know, a sticker or an elastoplast that gets put over so many different things and means so many different things to different people. So I think, you know, I know we're going to talk about this in a few minutes, but I think really understanding what ABM could and should mean for your organization, having a really clear strategy, getting senior management bought in from the get-go, and really having the teams aligned, you know, is a major issue. And so many companies start, I think, without those things in place. So I think it comes down to having the right resources, the right people, and I have to say the right budget, to be able to do this effectively. And I also find quite a lot of companies trying to do this stuff in-house exclusively. And I think that's a big ask for any internal team to be able to run, a fully integrated ABM program across a significant number of accounts.
So as a sort of follow-up to that, I mean, how do you define what ABM means for your organization and who should be responsible for building and managing it?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question. I mean, I think, clearly one can do the research, one can speak to consulting firms and practitioners in the industry. There are a lot of definitions of ABM floating around. I think the most important thing is that you ground your definition of ABM in what you're trying to achieve as an organization. And that's going to be driven by, the deal sizes that you're looking for, the types of customers that you're looking to engage, the length of the sales cycle. And working out how you engage the wider organization. I mean, it's interesting that ABM is the acronym that we're all stuck with, which has marketing clearly as the third ingredient. But a lot of companies are starting to talk about account-based strategy, account-based engagement, account-based experience. And I think, in a lot of ways, whether it's ABS or ABE or ABX, that may well be a better way to define things for your organization. But I think it's a bit like a brand, or a mission statement. You need to have something that you can actually publish to the organization, and you need to make sure that, you've got buy-in from the top down, and it's something that's compelling, that's believable, and people can understand why they should have, some skin in the game.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And we'll get into sort of, Rob, your take on sort of senior level buy-in in just a minute. But I guess, Carrie or Rob, do you have anything to add to that?
I'll just say, I think I agree 100% with everything that Robert just said. Spot on.
I guess, Matt, one thing I didn't quite answer which is who should own it. Yeah. And I think, almost inevitably, you're going to have marketing own ABM, but I don't think they should own it as in the sense that it's theirs and no one else's. They may be the orchestra conductors, if you like, but it's extremely important. I mean, it's a no-brainer that sales have to be engaged. But really, for successful ABM strategies to work, I think you need the entire organization to be bought into the approach for pre-sales, sales, post-sales, marketing, customer experience, maybe even finance and ops. So it really is, in a sense, a change management program of how you go to market. It's about focusing on the 20% rather than the 80%. And it's about really investing in those accounts in the right way to see the right results.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely an organizational shift that needs to happen, and it doesn't just happen in the marketing department. It's got to happen across almost the entire organization to make it work effectively. So I guess to you, Rob, I mean, how do you get sales and C-level buy-in with alignment on the sort of goals and objectives, and should ABM be a business strategy?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tricky question. I'll probably break it into two parts, right? So in terms of getting, buy-in, certainly my approach was more focused on the sales leadership, because I knew that's where the biggest impact was essentially going to be with the type of ABM program that I was putting together. So, once I'd kind of got conceptual sign-off to ABM, across, the marketing leaders, I had the sales leaders that we're going to have teams involved in the program interview the potential ABM agencies with me, right? So I knew I couldn't build ABM internally. I needed to staff this thing externally. So I went and found specialist agencies that could help me in this field. And it was important for me to get sales in early and talking to the potential agencies. And as part of that process, obviously they met the agency people. They went over the ABM approach and the methodology, and they looked at examples of what good ABM looked like, right? So by doing this, I was able to educate, sales, get aligned with their sales strategy, and make sure that, I ultimately get their buy-in and support for the ABM approach. So that was a strategy that for me worked, right? So in terms of business strategy, not potentially, yes. I mean, Copernicus, so we've always put the customer at the center of everything that we do. And you'll hear that a lot from customers, but, connecting the, Carrie's MarTech conversation, you could apply to to all of your systems and processes, across your organization, and just how customer centric they are, or, how difficult they are to make customer centric. So for me, in terms of strategy, it was, that ABM was foundational to my marketing strategy and plan, right? Which impacts sales as well, right? So the sales segment that I'm responsible, obviously, is the indirect route to market, and it's really specialized in terms of the intel that you need to gather, and the value props that you need to leverage to expand the relationship. So I needed to be able to scale resources and expertise quickly, and really going the ABM route, wasn't just the plan, it was the whole strategy for me, right? That was how I was going to stand up my entire marketing program around this particular segment.
So not to put you on the spot, and it wasn't one of the pre questions, but as you were evaluating, outside help from agencies, like what were some of the key things that you were looking for in an agency, and what sort of differentiated one from another, and why did you, what sort of,
you put me on the spot there.
I know.
I think it was, it's more about people, right? The people that you meet. The agency that I ended up selecting, a lot of the folks in the agency had client side experience as well. So that was also important for me. They kind of understood the business and where I was coming from. They were able to, really show, articulate, which I'm having a problem with at the moment, the methodology and process approach that they would go through in order to help me implement ABM within my business. That made real sense to me. They had a real methodology around that. They would own it soup to nuts. And yes, I looked at case studies and examples, and I spoke to references as well. But it was more about the people and the process for me more than anything. And obviously, it wasn't just my responsibility or my decision for choosing the particular agencies I went with. It was also sales as well. So who would they best work with? Because these would be people that they would be having a lot of interaction with. So does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you. And that's kind of a nice segue into my next question for Carrie, and may have a little different perspective, but what is more important for ABM success? Is it data? Is it technology? Is it people? Is it a combination of all three? Like, what are your thoughts there?
Yes, the answer is yes. It's all of those things. Plus, what Rob just mentioned, which is process. I'll give a very quick process example, because I really want everybody listening to this to go check if you have this process issue right now. And that is, if you run an ABM program and it works, one of the things that's going to happen is you're going to get more leads coming in from those accounts. That would seem like a good thing. But most organizations in B2B today have a process where if you have an SDR, BDR, whatever you might call them, who follows up on those leads that come in, the process that you have in place probably goes something like this. BDR gets a lead, follows up with it. If they get lucky and all that works out, they produce an opportunity that goes to sales. But if we're doing ABM, you're not going to get just one lead. So the next week, another lead comes in from that same organization. The BDR gets that lead, and their process is they look to see if an open opportunity. If the answer is yes, they mark that lead as disqualified. And then when the third or fourth or fifth lead comes in, they do the same thing. So that's partly what I meant about putting ABM on top of old processes. That is suicide for your ABM program, because the whole point of it is to get the entire buying team or buying teams to come engage with you. But then if you suppress or ignore all of those signals when they do, how have you benefited? What are you doing, right? So that's an example of a process that has to change. But I think we'll tie together two things really closely. One is data and the other one is technology. So at 6 Sense, we talk this thing called the dark funnel, which is a nice, ominous, good marketing term for the fact that most of the buying that your buyers do, whoever you are, happens away from outside of your vision, happens on the internet, at other companies' sites, at influencers' sites, at your site. It also happens on your website. If you're not de-anonymizing your web traffic to see what companies are there, then you've got a big dark funnel on your website. And then if you have this problem I just about with multiple leads and disqualifying them, that's another place where you've got really great buying signals and they're in the dark, you can't see them. So that's a data problem, right? There's all kinds of data out there that says, here's where you should be focusing your time. Here are the prospects that are in market, and you can't get at that data. So, in my elaborate metaphor of the dark funnel, think of the dark funnel maybe as a cave where this hidden treasure of opportunities exists. But you need some sort of technology, some magic technology to get past the dragon that's sitting at the gate of that cave, right? So you need that, whatever, it's a lot of the things I just mentioned. It's intent signals, it's de-anonymizing traffic, it's bringing those leads together on an opportunity so that you can see which prospects you really ought to be focusing your time and attention on. And so it's that data that you have to get, it's the technology that gets you there, and it's the process to make sure that you're not, at least at the very worst, shooting yourself in the foot along the way. So that's how I see those things intertwined. I think the people are fine. Everybody that I work with in B2B organizations marketing, smart people will do the right thing when they know what the right thing is to do. That's not really a problem. There's some education to be done, but that's the easiest part of it. The hardest part of it is let's uncover where those buyers are and make sure that we focus our attention on them.
Is that a shift from, is it just a shift from, MQLs to like marketing qualified accounts? Is that enough, or does it have to, continue to evolve beyond just like the accounts themselves?
Yeah, it's got to evolve a little bit beyond that. The idea of a marketing qualified account is much better than a marketing qualified lead because you're looking at the whole package. And that's really the disconnect that there's been between marketing and sales. Marketing, when we introduced digital marketing 15 years ago or so, marketing got, for the first time, had buyers actually coming in and coming in through a marketing channel. That hadn't happened before, really. But that channel, that way that it happened, just not the right way. So anyway, leads not good, accounts better, but where it really should be focused are on opportunities. For B2B organizations, the reason you would select an account as a target account almost always has something to do with your ability to sell to that organization multiple times concurrently with multiple solutions, or multiple times serially over time. And so it's really about the opportunities. How many opportunities are inside an organization? Which ones should we focus on now? How do we do that? And that's a more transformative step. The good news is, that's actually really easy. Once you've got opportunities in your systems today, sales already runs on opportunities. It's really aligning all of those signals that marketing has to them to bring them through.
Robert, anything to add on that front?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's an interesting perspective that Carrie gives. And I think, it's typically what I would call one-to-many ABM, where it's at the top of the funnel and you're very much in qualification mode. And this, I think, sort of almost accentuates what I was talking about earlier, which is the definition of ABM. If you're targeting hundreds of accounts, or heaven forbid, thousands of accounts, then clearly it is about data and it is about technology. If you're targeting half a dozen, UK banks or US banks, and you may already have some kind of footprint there, then the kind of ABM that you're going to be looking to do is probably going to be quite different. So I don't think it negates the need for technology or data. They're both extremely important, but I think there is a tendency, to sometimes get the kind of excited by the possibility, if you like, of ABM from a demand gen perspective, top of the funnel, lots of accounts to talk to, and maybe forgetting that actually, some of the the sweet spots for ABM are looking at accounts on a single and a very personalized basis with in-depth research, insight, and really developing your strategy, value proposition, and messaging almost uniquely for that account. And that's where this whole continuum of one-to-many through into one-to-few and one-to-one, what is the right ABM for your organization? And how do you make that work? So I think, at the end of one-to-one ABM, it is very heavily driven by the people and the relationships that you have between sales and marketing, other departments within the organization, and typically a very close relationship with your consultants or agency partners.
So in thinking about like one-to-one, one-to-few, one-to-many, is there a right approach, a right mix? Should organizations be doing all three? Should they select one, or is it really dependent on the types of accounts they're going after and what they're trying to achieve and kind of that end KPI that they're looking to get?
Yeah, well, I think to a degree, it is about the size of the accounts you're looking for. I mean, if you're looking for multi-million-dollar deals, then clearly the more focused you can be and the more personalized you can be into that account, the better. If you're looking at a deal size that's significantly lower than that, then that's where you start to move more into a volume play. If you're selling multi-million-dollar deals, you probably don't want hundreds of leads. You might want half a dozen really great opportunities. So from that perspective, I think it's about the types of companies you're trying to do business with, but it's also about your organization and the status. So it might be that you do need demand gen, if you like, or one-to-many, where you're perhaps trying to bring in 100 accounts at the top of the funnel to qualify further. You might have a couple of verticals where you have a really strong footprint, and that lends itself to one-to-few. And then you might have 5, 10, 15 accounts that are absolutely mission critical, and that lends itself to one-to-one. So you could easily have a blend within an organization with a large deal size. But if you're trying to do ABM and you have a lower value solution set, then that kind of lends itself a little bit more, I think, to the one-to-many play.
Sure. Great. Well, I'm going to take a quick pause here for our second poll question. Get that launched. Go. So what is your biggest ABM challenge is the question. So we'll give that just a moment to run here. All right, get some answers in here. Give me just another minute. All right, looks like we've gotten through that. So looks like the number one is integrating technology platforms, followed by providing sales with actionable account level insights. So awesome, thanks all for participating in that. So moving along to the next question, and this one's for Carrie. Carrie, how do you select which target accounts to prioritize and then track engagement through the funnel?
There's not a simple right way to do it. As Robert mentioned, you may have a strategy involved selling to just a very small number of companies. You don't need, say, fancy predictive analytics if your target market is the top 10 banks in the world or in the country or wherever you are. So the methods that you use to select the accounts can vary according to how many of them there are, how differentiated those specs and the segments might be. If, as you go to commercial markets, larger organizations or larger addressable markets, you need more sophisticated analyses to understand what those are. The single most important thing in select head of accounts is that marketing, sales, and I think Rob mentioned the customer organization in what he was talking about earlier, really critical that all parts of that revenue engine are on the exact same page. Which accounts are which are the ones that get that more one-to-one kind of treatment, which are the ones a different one, which are the ones that get another one, and how do you decide who's in and who's out and where you're going to focus your time? And so that's, to me, the single most important thing is that the entire organization is completely aligned behind which ones fit in which bucket and which ones you're going to focus on. It doesn't mean they can't change over time, but change over time, you also have to be completely aligned on how and why and when they would change. So that piece is really, really critical. And if I could, I want to, one thing that, Robert suggested about those one-to-one accounts. I had an experience with a client of ours back at Serious Decisions, will remain nameless. These guys had a small set of this kind of one-to-one accounts. And one of the things that we discovered is that they were literally getting hundreds of leads a week from that account, hundreds of people filling out forms from that account. But they had a process in their SDR function that round robin those leads to different people. So out of 100 leads coming in, somebody might get 2 of them in a week, but most of them get distributed out across the organization. And nobody knew there was 100 leads coming in. Literally nobody knew that there were 100 leads coming in from that organization, or what they were for, from what department, about what product, right? There's a place where there's a data problem that you have to fix in order to truly service that customer appropriately, because you're not, it's a terrible customer experience if that's what you're doing to your this great target. So I think we can bring together all of these views with each kind. It's kind of looking at how do the process and the technologies and the data apply to each of those groups that Robert talked is spot on. You've got to really understand what those are, but then how do you apply the kinds of solutions that are available today to really service those accounts the way that they should be.
Yeah, and Rob, as a follow-up to that, I mean, sort of at the client side, I mean, I know you sort of have a smaller set of accounts that you prioritize, but how do you go about prioritizing accounts within Verizon?
Yeah, that was an interesting process, because we were just looking at a small but mighty market segment in terms of our, the indirect business. So kind of sales had, 35 targets that they're interested in. We use the ABM process to refine the sales strategy. And I kind of remember having the conversation with the CEO of the main agency that I used for ABM at the time. We were looking at one-to-one and one-to-a-few kind of strategies, and and he said, Rob, don't get on one bus, right? Because meaning don't get on one-to-one, because anything could happen. You need to do one-to-few as well, right? So there's actually a question in the chat, which is, I think Ed's asked the question, biggest challenge is resource, keen to do one-to-one, but finding it difficult to justify. And yeah, I mean, look, I was fortunate to have some kind of, funding early on where I could essentially take that risk. But you are taking a risk if you just do one-to-one, right? Or you do one-to-ones in a small amount of market. So for me, it was really refining the sales strategy, getting them really focused, using a method which was in with the ABM process of prioritizing, targets, and really understanding why we're prioritizing the targets, getting deep into the sales planning, really understanding kind of, what kind of target they've associated with an account, why they feel justified with that target, what relationships they have today. So you're getting very, very deep into that sales planning process, and you're using all of that insight, plus the external competitive, awareness as well, to really help, refine your targeting. So yeah, I ended up with about 15, and I put 1 or 2 of those accounts in a one-to-one where we felt we had a biggest opportunity. But also for me, it's not, it wasn't just about, that. Somebody else has kind of asked, I hope I don't destroy all the Q&A questions later on by going through these, but this is a relevant point, right? New business only, you're expanding wallet of clients. So if you're going after large accounts and they've got huge organizations that are, different functions, and you've got to, expand, which is that classic ABM pyramid, right? Identify, engage, and expand, right? If you're expanding, that is new business. You've got to think new business. You've got to think acquisition, because that is not going to be an add-on order, not in my experience. You've got to find new people. You convince them they may need to buy something different from your company. You need to think acquisition timelines as well there. So yeah, does that answer your question? I know I probably went off on one a bit there, but there was a lot of this covered in the previous debate.
No, it does, and we'll get into sort of a little bit deeper question around that in just a minute. But Robert, I'd love to hear sort of your perspective on this and sort of how you would approach it.
Well, I kind of touched on it already, I guess, which is from my point of view, it's probably about taking a blended approach. I think, you need to have a clear understanding of what your strategy is and what kind of accounts you're trying to engage. You clearly need to be working really closely with sales to find out what their priorities are and what their challenges are. And, if the message coming back from them is selling to existing customers is not a problem, then that drives a strategy of new name, new accounts. If breaking into or rather upselling and cross-selling to existing customers is a major challenge, and to Rob's point, they're having to go off and find completely new parts of the organization, then for me that lends itself to either a one-to-one or a one-to-few approach into existing customers. So much of this is driven, I think, by the dynamic of what are you trying to achieve, what's the upside if you're successful, what are the deal sizes, and then you need to apply the right type of ABM, to where you are in the sales cycle. And of course, that could be, there could be different accounts of different sizes at different stages of the sales cycle, all requiring a slightly different approach. So I think, whether you start with the one-to-many, using intent and qualifying accounts in, and then gradually upgrade them into one-to-few and one-to-many, or whether you start with one-to-one and you gradually scale out from there, is really down, I think, to the needs of the organization. I'm picking up on what Rob said. I would agree. I would never recommend that you do one-to-one account as your first pilot, because it's binary. You're either going to be successful or you're not, and it could take you 6 to 12 months to find that out, by which time everybody's lost interest in the ABM program. So I think you definitely have to have different things in play at different stages, so that you are engaging a large percentage of your internal stakeholders, but you've also kind of got different things in the mix, if you like, to prove or to test drive your success.
So in kind of thinking about that, I mean, in ABM, the first part of ABM is account, right? And account selection is critical foundation to being able to have successful account-based marketing. So I guess from that perspective, how do you advise your clients in selecting the accounts? What sort of, is it a data approach? Is it, defining what their ideal customer profile is and looking who's buying currently, or is it a mix of all of that to have that account selection?
Well, on one-to-one and one-to-few particularly, I think it's really important that you go through a really rigorous process, and that really involves sales and marketing scoring the accounts based around, opportunity, what's the size of the opportunity, what realistic chance do we have, how strong are the competition, what kind of early stage engagement have we had, achievability, do we think we can make this, do we have the right products and solutions, do we have the right people in place? And then the internal view, which is, do we have all our resources aligned? Is the sales lead or the account lead actually engaged with us? So there are a bunch of things, which I think, will be familiar to Carrie. I mean, I think it started with Serious Decisions many years ago, but I think, the important thing is that you need probably 10 criteria, maybe a few more, that you agree to in advance. And you say, right, we're going to put the top 10, 15, 20 accounts through this scoring process. And at the end of it, we'll know, in an empirical way, who scored the highest and what we think the best chances of success are. And I think that's important to select accounts. It's also important to be able to explain why accounts weren't selected, so that you can explain that to the account leads or the sales team. And also to have an audit trail, if in 6 months you haven't made any headway, to be able to go back to that process and say, well, look, guys, we went through the scoring process. Accounts 1, 2, and 3 looked like the ones we should have been focusing on. It now transpires that something changed and we need to realign. So I think for one-to-one, absolutely. For one-to-few, it's still important that you're picking the accounts on a really well thought through basis. I think on a one-to-many basis, it becomes less critical, and it's not about account scoring in a really, empirical way, if you like. It's probably more about data analysis to say, well, if we're going to go after these verticals, what would the top 10, top 20, top 30 accounts in each vertical look like? And that's probably going to be based more around, things like the company's revenue or the technology they're using or their geographical footprint than it is, in-depth scoring around opportunity, achievability, and internal alignment.
Sure. So this next question comes from the chat, and I think, Carrie, you'd probably be the best person to answer this, but how do you tackle the challenge of selecting the right tools that are not just marketing hype or just another screwdriver in the toolbox, but something that can, truly transform as they engage with, few to one. And then is this with regard to identity buyer behavior segment is based on their maturity in the funnel, run tailored programs, gather intel that helps SDR team, sales marketing to craft smarter targeting, and one that's flexible and adapts based on buyer behavior.
That's a long question.
I know it's a lot. It is a long
question. The simple answer goes back to what Robert's talked about a couple of times, which is that's okay, perfectly okay. It's a good question. Which is you have to have a goal and you have to know what you need to accomplish. So when we built the demand unit waterfall at SiriusDecision, that was intended to be and is an account-centric waterfall. When we talk about waterfall stages, people's eyes glaze over a little bit. Sometimes smoke comes out of their ears when you try to explain what they are. But what they are actually just the repositories for the output of 7 things that you have to do. Identify which accounts and opportunities you care about. Notice which ones are in market so you don't miss any. So one of the key elements of ABM is you're making a bigger bet on a smaller number of accounts. If you're doing that, one of the things you have to do is make sure you don't miss any buying cycles that you could compete for. It's like, it's the simplest thing that I never hear anybody talking about. Don't miss any. And that's what all the intent data, knowing who's on your website, all of that is about. Don't miss any of those things. So you have to do that, and you have to have some technology to do that, unless you can be perfectly confident that your human beings know everybody in that account who could possibly matter, right? That's what you have to do. Then you have to know whether they're engaging with you, right? And you can't know that adequately with marketing automation and Google Analytics, right? You just can't. You have to be able to de-anonymize traffic. You have to be able to see leads together. You need like a lead to account matching solution to understand whether people filling out forms belong together, right? So you have to be able to see that. That's the third thing. Fourth thing is you got to have a way of prioritizing. That's a scoring function. So is it scoring of the account? Is it scoring of leads? Is it scoring of traffic? Yes, it's all of those things, right? And the more sophisticated you can be about that, the better off you'll be. Every step along the path, though, is an improvement from lead scoring, which is completely the wrong thing, right? So my answer is longer than even the question was, but the answer is you've got to look at those things that you do, look at them in priority order, and then you've got to have a solution for each. It doesn't have to be a technology solution. As Robert said, there are perfectly adequate ways of scoring and understanding those one-to-one or even one-to-few accounts that you want to go after. But if you're going after a bigger marketplace, you probably do need some tech there. You're going to need some tech to know whether those guys are in market. And I would strongly recommend, even if you have a one-to-one account, that you have technology that's identifying when those prospects are in market research and solutions, even when they might be looking for an alternate to what they have from you, right? You want to see that. And then the next one is have some sort of solution for bringing leads together inside your organization, seeing them together so that you don't miss when a buyer is knocking on your door and your doorbell is broken, right? That's the equivalent. So I would start and go that way. If you look at the SiriusDecisions or Forrester 7 must-dos, that's what they are. These are the 7 things you have to be able to do. You can already do some of them adequately. In some cases, some of them you don't have any capability for. You just got to fill in the blanks based on your goals.
Awesome. Thank you. That was a really good explanation, I think, for that. So next question is for Rob, and you sort of touched on this, Rob, but how do you manage the challenge of resource management and, as well as not that you're doing it at a huge scale, but, content personalization to at least your more sort of pared down account list. I think you're on mute, Rob.
There had to be one of us that would do that, and it was me. So right, yeah. So I think in terms of resource management, yeah. So for me, kind of, I'm activating multiple tactics, including content creation, right? And you have to kind of get everything lined up and kind of marching along the same journey at the same time. It's a lot more difficult if you lack the martech to support you to do that, right? But so the resources that you have access to, you'll probably find you've got a mix of internal and external folks, resources that you're going to have to plan for. So for me, really, planning was massive, right? So every single step of the ABM journey was mapped, governed, measured, and measured. So, again, I think I've said this already, you can't wing ABM. For me, it's a central strategy. It's not just something you bolt onto your marketing plan. It requires a lot of planning at every single step of the way to make sure you use your resources, your finite resources, in the right way. So managing an ABM program, you're the architect, right? You're the composer, right, of that particular strategy and the execution. So personalizing content at scale, right? So for me, it's when you are in your research phase of the ABM, right? You'll be identifying some kind of common themes and clusters amongst this space. So, I had a one-to-one and a kind of one-to-few approach. So within the one-to-few, we took our time to understand what are the themes that these entities are focused on, where we're seeing clusters with those themes, what is the value proposition that we bring to those different clusters. Once you've done that mapping, it becomes a lot easier, really, to then get into the process of producing content that is, if not personalized to the individual, is at least relevant to the individual, because we're hitting the themes, the things that are keeping them up at night through our content. So for me, the personalization of content at scale is all down to the research phase and how you're mapping out your information.
Gotcha. Thank you. This next question is for Robert, but I really want to hear sort of everyone's perspective, because it's around measurement and what should be expected from short and long-term outcomes for account-based marketing.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether this is the $60 million question, or maybe it's bigger than that one, Matt. But I mean, measurement is clearly one of the biggest imperatives for ABM, and also one of the biggest challenges. Simplistically, what are we looking for? Well, we're looking for revenue. We're looking for increased revenue. We're looking for increased pipeline. We're looking for increased deal size. Maybe we're looking for reduced time to market. Those are the kind of big headlines of what ABM is looking to achieve. When I'm kind of looking at my ABM Essentials training course, I always try and get people to think, if you like, pragmatically about what they can achieve, and probably to build from the inside out. So the first thing I think about ABM is about getting internal alignment and getting sales and marketing and the wider organization really working together. And I think that has real value, and it shouldn't be underestimated. The second most important thing is probably really understanding your customers in a way that will enable you to talk to them about their issues in their language, rather than just trying to sell them something. So that also has real value. Then you start thinking about content, as we were just touching on, and how do you create really relevant, personalized, targeted content that's going to resonate, with your target audience and differentiate you from the competition. So that has real value. And so far, we haven't even got to any revenue or any deals. So I think it's really important that people understand that account-based marketing is this fundamental change of attitude. It's about, looking at the outside world and then working out what our role in it is, rather than looking at our world and working out how we can impose that on other people. ultimately, having got the internal teams aligned, having got the customer insight in place, having got your content really firing on all 4 cylinders, or 6 cylinders, then it's about customer engagement. And so that's about dialogue, conversations, meetings, and really having your sales team buzzed about the fact that they're getting to talk to people they haven't been able to talk to previously. So all of those things for me have value even before you get to, well, we've got 5 new deals in the pipeline, we've got $2 million in the pipeline, we've got $10 million in the pipeline, and we've actually closed something. Ultimately, your ABM program will be judged on, did you see an uplift in revenue? So there's no getting away from that. But I do think it's important that senior management and the whole kind of ecosystem internally understands the value of those other things I've touched on.
Interesting. And it sounds like if you get your processes and structure and alignment in place and correct, with any luck, even if not, the outcome should be, more deals, bigger deals, more revenue, as a sort of byproduct of getting your alignment and those processes in place. So you should see that uptick regardless.
I would say so. We've developed this thing at B2B marketing called the ABM Value Pyramid. And as you know, pyramids have a habit of working from a very strong foundation and then gradually laddering up from there. So I think all of the things that you put in place in those foundational layers have real value and will definitely yield results. Whether they yield them as quickly as the organization wants them to is another question. But it is fundamentally a different way of doing business and a different way of sales and marketing. And if you're doing it properly, then those foundations, I think, will pay dividends many times over, over the next 1 to 3 years, 3 to 5 years, whatever number you choose to pick.
Sure. Carrie, anything to add in terms of the measurement piece?
Yeah, I think the thing that I like to ask everybody who's starting on or has just started on an ABM journey is, how are you going to notice if it's working? What are the early indicators that what you're doing is generating something that could lead to that revenue, to pipeline of revenue? And it's astonishing to see how often that question is met with silence. So, you're going to generate more. You're going to generate more anonymous traffic. That is simply going to happen, and you're going to generate more form fill leads. How are you going to notice that happened? You have to measure it. You have to see it. You have to measure it. And that's a very early indicator that your content, all of the other things that you've worked on are working. Then you look at opportunities. Are we generating more opportunities? Are those opportunities getting to pipeline? And then ultimately, are they closing? There's a lot more. There's a lot of things that Robert talked about. But at the very highest level, you got to have those things. And if you don't have those things, the other things that you have are just going to be a distraction.
Sure. Rob?
Yeah, I agree with the previous 2 responses, really. For me, it's about, the ABMs, they take a lot of investment. Yeah, and you have to stay the course for a prolonged period of time. And you're going to need to show revenue for it at the end of the day. For me, it's kind of, obviously leading and lagging indicators, looking at the lagging indicators. I'm looking at lead quality, how many we're delivering, where we're delivering them. And are we finding projects through those new relationships? What's the value of the projects, and then the outcome? What you have to bear in mind, and particularly if you're in a high value, low volume B2B environment, is that you're going to have to stay the course with those leads. You're going to have to keep a really careful eye on those leads. So there's not just handing them over to sales and let them kick on with it. You've got to be having regular touch points, because when sales get a lead, it's not an order on a plate. That never really happens. That's kind of an A lead. It doesn't happen really. They're going to have to continue to develop it, and you're going to need to figure out how you're going to help them develop those leads. And you can come to an arrangement around that with sales. You're going to have to stay the course with them in order to start seeing that pipeline and funnel and bookings, starting to come out of those really good quality leads that you're going to be handing over. So yeah, you should also kind of think measurement, not just to the point of the MQL, SAL, SQL, and then wait for the pipeline. You've also got to be inspecting it much further down into the sales development phase.
So 2 follow-up questions to you, Rob. One, have you have results started to show? And 2, are you rewarded as an ABM team, or is it seen as a sales win?
Yes, results are starting to show. And the way that I kind of measure myself is, what is my contribution to the sales number? So is it 5%, 2%, contribution to the funnel and bookings? And that's in the team's objectives. We make ourselves accountable there for delivering that business. And don't forget, we're writing business cases around the ABM. We're justifying the funding, and we've got to show the revenue at the end of it, right? So there's absolutely an accountability there. When we deliver a good lead into sales and it leads to a project, that's celebrated. Sales recognize what we're doing. And we have such a close relationship with the sales team anyway through the ABM process. So yeah, does that answer your question?
It does. It does. Thank you. And so we're at time here, just about, and I want to give everyone one last chance to sort of give one piece of advice, if that's even possible. But this will be available on demand shortly, so you can share with colleagues if they weren't able to join. And so I guess I'll go to you, Robert. What is one piece of advice you would give for anyone who is starting out with ABM or who has struggled to make it work? I know one piece of advice is nearly impossible, but if you could give one.
Yeah, it's a thorny question, Matt. I hope I don't sound like a stuck record, but for me, it's about strategy and having a really clear plan of what you're trying to achieve and why. It's about making sure that you've got the right stakeholders in the business engaged. And then it's about going after these things, in a way that feels appropriate for your business. So that could be that you pick, a handful of one-to-one accounts and that's your focus. Or it could be that you're starting at the top of the funnel looking with a much wider base of accounts where perhaps it's all about intent and the accounts being in market. So I think, it's like ABM for me is a series of building blocks. It isn't a one size fits all. And you need to take those building blocks and create something, unique for your organization that works and that you can really commit to and see through.
Carrie?